Hello, everybody. It's me, Bigfoot, Michigan, Rob, and it's Saturday. I dropped my typical Friday night encounters yesterday. If you haven't seen that story, it's a great one. Go, please check it out. In an attempt to kind of expand the depth of my programming, I was just thinking, as Bigfoot enthusiasts, a lot of times we forget about the classic stories, well before Patterson Gimlin. And there are a lot of good ones out there. And I think sometimes we're all caught up into 1980s, 1990s, 2000, 2020. And again, I do provide a lot of those encounters via emails and via subscribers. But then I thought, it'd be cool to do maybe once a month a series of the classics and where all this really originated from. Because I think sometimes we lose focus. We all live in the present, we all live in the now. But where we're at today, we got to look at the history. This is the classic Bauman encounter back in the days of Teddy Roosevelt. And again, this is my attempt to do something different. And I hope you like it. Leave a comment. I'm thinking about doing one of these per month. And I'm going to get on with this. Now, I do have to say, this was by Bobby Short. Now, this story has been passed on from generation to generation. And I did not alter this story at all. I'm reading it as it's been written throughout the years. So a lot of the verbiage is a little different than what we're used to, but I'm keeping this true to form from the older days, how these people spoke. It's not all that different, but I did want to forewarn you on that. And I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, because I'm thinking we should all reflect on the history of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. So I'm going to get started. The Deadly Bauman Encounter, written by Bobby Short and others, passed down throughout the years. So with that being said, again, I'm going to get going. And by the way, this is my 12th take. I don't want to redo it. A grizzled, weather-beaten old mountain hunter named Bauman, who born and had spent all of his life on the frontier, told of this story. He must have believed what he said, for he could hardly repress a shudder at certain points of his tale. Bauman was of German ancestry, and in childhood had doubtless been saturated with all kinds of ghost and goblin lore, so that many fearsome superstitions were latent in his mind. Besides, he knew well the stories told by the Indian medicine men in their winter camps of the snow walkers and the specters, spirits, ghosts, and apparitions. The formless evil beings that haunt the forest depths and dog and waylay the lonely wanderer who after nightfall passes through the regions where they lurk. It may be that when overcome by the horror of the fate that befell his friend, and when oppressed by the awful dread of the unknown, he grew to attribute both at the time and still more in the remembrance weird and elfkin traits to what was merely a abnormally wicked and cunning wild beast. But whether this was so or not, no man can say. I think you understand where I'm getting at. German dialect passed on, so the verbiage is a little different to us. Fantastic story, though. When the event occurred, Bauman was still a young man and was trapping with a partner among the mountains dividing the forks of the Salmon from the head of Wisdom River. Not having much luck, he and his partner determined to go up into a particularly wild and lonely pass through which ran a small stream said to contain many beavers. The pass had an evil reputation because the year before A solitary hunter who had wandered into it was slain, seemingly by a wild beast, the half eaten remains being afterwards found by some mining prospectors who had passed his camp only the night before. The memory of this event, however, weighed very lightly with the two trappers he was with, who were as adventurous and hardy as any other trapper of his kind. They were wild men, mountain men. They took their two lean mountain ponies to the foot of the pass where they left them in an open beaver meadow. The rocky timber-clad ground began from upwards from there, impregnable for their horses. They then struck out on foot through the vast, gloomy forest and in about 4 hours reached a little open glade where they concluded to camp, as signs of game were plentiful. There was still an hour or two of daylight left, and after building a brush lean-to and throwing down and opening their packs, they started upstream. The country was very dense and hard to travel through, as there was much down timber, although here and there the somber woodland was broken by small glades of mountain grass. At dusk, they again reached their camp. The glade in which it was pitched was not many yards wide, the tall, close-set pines and firs rising round it like a wall. On one side was a little stream, beyond which rose the steep mountain slope covered with the unbroken growth of evergreen forest. They were surprised to find that during their absence, something, apparently a bear, had visited their camp and had rummaged about their things, scattering the contents of their packs, and in sheer wantonness destroyed their lean-to. The footprints of the beast were quite plain, but at first they paid no particular heed to them, busying themselves with rebuilding the lean-to, laying out their beds and stores, and lighting a fire. While Bauman was busy making supper, it being already dark, his companion began to examine the tracks more closely, and soon took a brand from the fire to follow them up, where the intruder had walked along a game trail after leaving camp. When the brand flickered out, he returned and took another, repeating his inspection of the footprints very closely. Coming back to the fire, he stood by it a minute or two, peering out into the darkness, and suddenly remembered, "Bauman, that bear has been walking on two legs." Bauman laughed at this, but his partner insisted that he was right, and upon again examining the tracks with a torch, they certainly did seem to be made by 2 paws or 2 feet. However, it was too dark to make sure, and after discussing whether the footprints could possibly be those of a human being and coming to the conclusion that they could not be, the two men rolled up their blankets and went to sleep under the lean-to. At midnight, Bauman was awakened by some noise and sat up in his blankets. As he did so, his nostrils were struck by a strong wild beast odor, and he caught the loom of a great body in the darkness at the mouth of the lean-to. Grasping his rifle, he fired at the vague, threatening shadow, but must have missed, for immediately afterwards he heard the smashing of the underwood as the thing, whatever it was, rushed off into the impenetrable blackness of the forest and into the night. After this, the two men slept but little. Sitting up by the rekindled fire, they heard nothing more. In the morning, they started out to look at the few traps that had set the previous evening and put out new ones. By an unspoken agreement, they kept together all day and returned to the camp towards evening. On nearing it, they saw, hardly to their astonishment, that the lean to had again been torn down. Wow. The visitor of the preceding day had returned, and in wanton malice had destroyed and tossed their camp, destroyed their bedding, and destroyed their shanty. The ground was marked up by its tracks, and on leaving the camp, it had gone along the soft earth by the brook. The footprints were as plain as if on snow, and, after a careful scrutiny of the trail, it certainly did seem as if whatever the thing was, again, it walked on two legs. Now, you guys, this is in the 1800s, and these guys are experiencing something. Two legs, destroyed their place where they're camping several times already. So I'm wondering what these guys were thinking, right? The men, thoroughly uneasy, gathered a great heap of dead logs and kept up a roaring fire throughout the night. One or the other sitting on guard most of the time. About midnight, the thing came down the forest opposite across the brook and stayed there on the hillside for nearly an hour. They could hear the branches crackle as it moved about, and several times it uttered a harsh grating. Long drawn moan, a peculiarly sinister sound. Yet it did not venture near the fire. It laid there and sat. In the morning, the two trappers, after discussing the strange events of the last 36 hours, decided that they should shoulder their packs and leave the valley that afternoon. They were more ready to do this because, in spite of seeing a good deal of game, they had caught little. However, it was necessary first to go along the line of their traps and gather them. And this they started out to do it. All the morning they kept together, picking up trap after trap, each one empty. On first leaving camp, they had the disagreeable sensation of being followed. In the dense spruce thickets, they occasionally heard a branch snap after they had passed. And now and then there was the sound of rustling noises amongst the small pines to the side of them, and now they feel they're being paralleled and being stalked. At noon, they were back within a couple miles of camp. Bright sunlight lit their fears. It seemed absurd to the two armed men, accustomed as they were through long years of lonely wandering in the wilderness, to face every kind of danger from man, brute, or element. There were still 3 beaver traps to collect from a little pond and a wide ravine nearby. Bauman volunteered to gather these and bring them in, while his companion went ahead to camp and make their packs ready. On reaching the pond, Bauman found 3 beavers in the traps, one of which had been pulled loose and carried into a beaver house. He took several hours in securing and preparing the beaver, and when he started homewards, he marked, with some uneasiness, how low the sun was getting. As he hurried toward the camp, under the tall trees, the silence and desolation of the forest weighed on him. His feet made no sound of the pine needles, and the slanting sun rays striking through amongst the straight trunks made a gray twilight in which objects at a distance glimmered indistinctly. There was nothing to break the gloomy stillness which, when there is no breeze, always broods over these somber, primeval forests. Alicia came to the edge of the little glade where the camp lay and shouted out as he approached, but he got no answer. The campfire had gone out through the thin blue smoke and was still curling upwards. Near it lay the packs wrapped and arranged. At first, Bauman could see nobody, nor did he receive an answer to his call. Stepping forward, he again shouted, and as he did so, his eye fell on the body of his friend, stretched beside the trunk of a great fallen spruce. Rushing towards it, the horrified trapper found that the body was still warm, but that the neck was broken, while there were 4 great fang marks in his throat. The footprints of the unknown beast creature, printed deep in the soft soil, told the whole story. The unfortunate man, having finished his packing, had sat down on the spruce log with his face to the fire and his back to the dense woods, to wait for his companion. While thus waiting, his monstrous assailant, which must have been lurking in the woods, waiting for a chance to catch one of the adventurers unprepared, came silently up from behind, walking with long, noiseless steps and seemingly still on 2 legs. Evidently unheard, it reached the man and broke his neck by wrenching his head back with its forepaws while it buried its teeth into his throat. It had not eaten the body, but apparently had roped or romped it and gambled it around in an uncouth, ferocious glee, occasionally rolling it over and then fled back into the soundless depths of the woods. Now, that writing, again, is different from what we're used to, but apparently this thing took this man, broke his neck, bit into him, killed him, and then kind of rolled it over and over again. I'm imagining like an alligator taking its prey underwater. So that's what I got out of that description. Again, this is written back some time ago. Bauman, utterly unnerved and believing that the creature with which he had to deal with was something either half human or half devil, some great goblin beast, abandoned everything but his rifle. He abandoned everything but his rifle and struck off at a speed down the pass, not halting until he reached the beaver meadows, where the hobbled ponies were still grazing. Mounting, he rode onwards through the night until beyond the reach of pursuit. I'm just looking here. There is, by the way, a second passage in The Wilderness Hunter where Teddy Roosevelt may quite possibly have been describing a personal Bigfoot experience himself that he had in Washington State Park that didn't go on or was never really reported. But this story was written in 1995, Bobby Short. Again, you can tell that this was passed on and on for centuries. I mean, since the 1800s, the way it was written. I presented it as it was written. But, as a creepy story, you guys, that was something that we don't hear a lot about, do we? About Bigfoot killing people. Apparently, the chilling Bauman encounter tale has something to do. Do you think it was Bigfoot? Do you think the story was made up? I don't know. I hope you like that. Bigfoot Michigan Rob, let me know if you want me to continue with the classics of Bigfoot. This was my 12th time reading this, so excuse me for not starting it over. Please subscribe. Bigfoot Michigan Rob. I appreciate each and every single one of you. Until next time, Bigfoot Michigan Rob is out.